He walked into the diner with his application paperwork and a plastic folder his daughter had given him years ago. His steel-toed boots squeaking against the tile floor because they were still wet from the morning rain. The young hiring manager laughed when he said he was applying for the dishwasher position. Told him they needed someone who could move fast and handle the heat. But when he finally showed them the real reason he needed this $13 an hour job and what he'd lost to get here, every person in that kitchen stopped what they were doing, and some of them cried right there over the prep tables. Martin Reeves was 67 years old, and he'd never washed dishes professionally in his life. The sign in the window of Jack's Family Diner had been there for 6 weeks. Faded white letters on red cardboard, the kind you could buy at any office supply store, taped to the inside of the glass. Help wanted. Dishwasher, prep cook, apply within. Martin had driven past it 42 times before he finally pulled into the parking lot on a Tuesday morning in October. He'd counted. Each time he drove by on his way to nowhere in particular, burning gas he couldn't afford, pretending he had somewhere to be, he'd seen that sign and felt something twist in his chest. Pride, maybe. Or shame. Probably both. The parking lot was mostly empty at 9:47 a.m. That dead zone between breakfast and lunch when diners enter their brief period of quiet before the next rush. 3 cars clustered near the entrance, probably employees. A pickup truck with contractor logos parked at the far end. Martin's 2011 Ford Taurus with its missing hubcap and the duct tape holding the passenger side mirror looked exactly like what it was. The vehicle of someone who couldn't afford to fix things anymore. He sat in the driver's seat with the engine off, staring at the diner. It was the kind of place that existed in every American town. Vinyl booths, Formica countertops, laminated menus with too many options, a jukebox that probably hadn't worked since 1987 but that nobody had bothered to remove. The building itself was probably 50 years old, single-story, flat-roofed, with big windows that let you see the people inside eating their pancakes and scrambled eggs and bacon. Through those windows, Martin could see a young waitress, couldn't have been more than 19, wiping down tables. An older woman, maybe in her 50s, stood behind the cash register counting something. A cook visible through the kitchen window, flipping something on the griddle. Normal people doing normal work. Martin hadn't done normal work in 11 months. He'd been a construction supervisor for 39 years. Started as a laborer when he was 18, worked his way up through framing, roofing, electrical, plumbing, until he was running crews of 20, 30, sometimes 40 men on commercial projects, shopping centers, office buildings, schools. He'd built half the town he lived in, if he was being honest. His hands had poured the concrete, framed the walls, wired the electricity that made this place function. And then his company had been bought by a larger firm out of Texas. New management, new priorities, new cost structures. They'd kept most of the younger supervisors, the ones with college degrees in construction management. The ones who understood the new project management software. The ones who cost less because they hadn't been there long enough to have maxed out their salary bands. Martin had been making $87,000 a year, plus benefits, plus a company truck, plus performance bonuses that some years pushed him over 6 figures. They'd offered him a severance package, 3 months' salary, continuation of health insurance for 6 months, and a letter of recommendation. He'd taken it because what else was he supposed to do? That had been 11 months ago. The severance had run out. The health insurance had run out. The savings he and his late wife Linda had built up over 40 years, the nest egg they'd planned to use for retirement, for travel, for spoiling their grandkids, had dwindled from $127,000 to $11,400. As he paid for rent and utilities and groceries, and Linda's remaining medical bills from the cancer that had taken her 3 years ago. He'd applied to every construction company within 50 miles. Most hadn't responded. The ones that did told him they were looking for people with more current experience, or that they'd filled the position, or that they'd keep his resume on file. One hiring manager had been honest. "Look, Martin, you're great. Your experience is incredible, but you're 67. Our insurance costs go up when we hire older workers. And honestly, we need guys who can be here for the next 20 years, not the next 3. That had been the moment Martin understood that his career was over. Not because he couldn't do the work. He was still strong, still capable. His knees ached and his back wasn't what it used to be, but he could put in a full day. He knew more about construction than most of the kids they were hiring would learn in their entire careers. But nobody wanted to hire someone his age. Nobody wanted to invest in training someone who might retire in a few years. Nobody wanted to deal with the perceived risk of an older worker getting injured or needing time off for health problems or simply not fitting in with their younger workforce. So after months of rejection, after watching his savings drain away, After missing his first rent payment in 43 years and having his landlord, a woman he'd known for 2 decades, gently tell him that she couldn't carry him anymore, Martin had made a decision. He would take whatever work he could get. Any work. Any job that would pay him enough to keep a roof over his head and food in his stomach, which is how a 67-year-old former construction supervisor found himself sitting in a parking lot, *ing at a help-wanted sign for a dishwasher position that would pay $13 an hour if he was lucky. He did the math in his head for the 1,000th time. 40 hours a week at $13 an hour was $520 before taxes, maybe $420 after taxes. Call it $1,680 a month. His rent was $950. Utilities another $150. Car insurance $120, gas maybe $100, groceries maybe $300 if he was careful. That was $1,620, which left him $60 a month for everything else. Phone bill, medication for his blood pressure, clothes when his wore out, emergency car repairs. It wasn't enough. Not really. But it was more than the $0 a month he was making now. So he picked up the plastic folder, got out of his car, and walked toward the diner. The door chimed when he pushed it open, one of those old-fashioned bells attached to the top of the frame. The waitress looked up from her table wiping and smiled automatically, the kind of smile service workers develop after enough shifts, warm but not quite reaching the eyes. "Good morning. Sit anywhere you'd like." "Actually," Martin said, his voice coming out rougher than he'd intended, "I'm here about the job, the dishwasher position." The waitress's smile faltered slightly. Her eyes did that quick scan head to toe, the assessment that people make when they're trying to figure out if you belong. Martin knew what she was seeing, a man in his late 60s with gray hair and a weathered face, wearing clean but old jeans and a button-down flannel shirt and work boots that had seen better decades. "Oh," she said. Yeah, let me get Corey. He's the one who handles hiring. Just wait here for a sec." She disappeared through the kitchen door, and Martin stood in the entryway feeling like he was standing on a stage, visible through those big windows to anyone passing by. The older woman at the cash register glanced at him, then away. A customer in one of the booths, middle-aged man in a business suit, probably on his way to work, looked at him for a moment, then went back to his phone. Martin had never felt more invisible and more exposed at the same time. The waitress returned with a young man in tow. Early 30s maybe, with a beard trimmed to look deliberately scruffy, wearing a Jack's Family Diner t-shirt and jeans and sneakers. He had the casual confidence of someone who'd never had to worry about money, never had to wonder where his next paycheck was coming from. "Hey, I'm Corey," the young man said, extending his hand. "I manage this location. You're interested in the dishwasher spot?" Martin shook his hand, firm grip, the way his father taught him, and nodded. "Yes, sir, Martin Reeves. I saw your sign and wanted to apply." Corey's eyes did the same scan the waitresses had done, and Martin watched the same calculation happen in real time. "Too old." "Okay, cool," Corey said, his tone friendly but with an undercurrent of something else. Doubt, maybe. "So what's your experience with restaurant work?" "I don't have restaurant experience," Martin admitted, "but I'm a hard worker, I learn fast, and I need the job." Corey nodded slowly. "Right, okay. So the thing is, the dishwashing position here is pretty intense. We do huge volume, especially during breakfast and lunch rush. You're on your feet the whole shift, you're lifting heavy bus tubs, you're working in a hot kitchen with steam everywhere. It's physically demanding." There it was. The coded language. Physically demanding. Which meant, we don't think you can handle it because you're old. "I understand that," Martin said evenly. "I've worked construction my entire adult life. I'm used to physical labor." "Construction, that's awesome," Corey said, but his expression didn't change. "How long has it been since you worked construction?" "I was a supervisor until 11 months ago. I ran crews on commercial projects," Supervisor Corey repeated. "So you were managing people, not doing the physical work yourself." Martin felt his jaw tighten. "I did physical work for 30 years before I became a supervisor. And even as a supervisor, I was on site, working with the crews, doing whatever needed to be done." For sure," Corey said. "Look, I'm not trying to be difficult here, but I gotta be honest with you, we had a guy your age work here about a year ago, doing the same position, and he lasted about 2 weeks before his back gave out. We're trying to avoid that situation again, you know? It's tough on everyone when we have to keep replacing people." "I'm not that guy," Martin said quietly. "I'm sure you're not," Corey said, but he was already backing toward the kitchen. "I tell you what, why don't you fill out an application and leave it with Angela at the register, and we'll review it and get back to you if anything opens up." The sign says you're hiring now, Martin pointed out. We are, but we've got a few other candidates we're looking at. We want to make sure we find the right fit. The right fit. More coded language. Young enough. Cheap enough. Desperate enough. But not too desperate. I understand, Martin said, though he didn't understand at all. Or rather, he understood too well. Corey nodded, relieved that Martin wasn't pushing back harder. Application's right over there by the register. Angela can help you out. Thanks for coming in. He disappeared back into the kitchen. And Martin was left standing there with his plastic folder, feeling the weight of 67 years pressing down on him like a physical force. He walked over to the register where Angela was counting bills. Up close, she looked older than he'd first thought, maybe late 50s, with the kind of face that had seen a lot but was still trying to smile through it. Applications in that folder there, Angela said, pointing to a plastic holder mounted on the wall. You need a pen? I have one, thank you, Martin said. He took an application, a single sheet of paper, double-sided, asking for name, address, social security number, previous employment, references, and sat down in the nearest booth. The questions were simple. Name, Martin James Reeves. Address, 447 Oakmont Drive, apartment 2B. Phone number. Email address, which he'd created specifically for job searching, and which was painfully outdated in its format. Email protected. Previous employment. Grayson Construction Company. Position, site supervisor. Dates, 1987 to 2024. Reason for leaving, company acquisition. Position eliminated. Before that, Grayson Construction Company. Position, senior foreman. Dates, 1995, 1987. Before that, Grayson Construction Company. Position, electrician. Dates, 1988 to 1995. He stopped writing and stared at the page. His entire adult life, right there in 3 lines. 39 years with one company, working his way up, building a career, building a life. And now he was filling out an application to wash dishes for $13 an hour at a place that didn't want him. He finished the application, filled in his references, his old boss Dan Grayson, who'd retired before the acquisition, 2 former colleagues who'd also been let go, his neighbor who'd known him for 20 years. He signed his name at the bottom, dated it, and walked back to the register. Angela was talking on the phone, some kind of order issue with a supplier, and she held up a finger in the universal just a minute gesture. Martin waited. When she hung up, Angela looked at him, and there was something in her eyes. Recognition, maybe? Sympathy? All finished? She asked. Yes, ma'am, Martin said, handing her the application. Angela glanced at it, and he watched her eyes catch on his birth date. She didn't say anything, but her expression shifted slightly. Corey said he'd review it and get back to me, Martin said, though they both knew what that meant. I'll make sure he sees it, Angela said. But the way she said it, the gentle sadness in her tone, told Martin everything he needed to know. He walked out of Jack's family diner, got back into his car, and sat there for a long moment staring at the steering wheel. Then he drove home to his apartment where the eviction notice was taped to his door. The eviction notice gave him 30 days. Martin sat on his couch, the same couch he and Linda had bought 28 years ago, reupholstered once after their daughter spilled red wine on it during a holiday party, and read the official language. Failure to pay rent. Legal proceedings. Requirement to vacate the premises. 30 days to find $950 for this month's rent, plus the $950 he owed from last month, plus whatever next month would be. $2,850. He had $11,400 in his savings account. If he paid the back rent, he'd have $8,550 left. If he paid this month's rent, he'd have $7,600. That would buy him maybe 7 more months of housing if he didn't eat or pay any other bills. But he did need to eat. And he did have other bills. The math wasn't mathing, as his granddaughter would say. Martin set the eviction notice on the coffee table and looked around his apartment. 420 square feet that had been his home for 3 years, since he'd sold the house after Linda died. He couldn't afford to keep up a 3-bedroom house on his own. Couldn't bear to live in all that empty space that reminded him of what he'd lost. So he'd sold it, taken the equity $240,000 after paying off the mortgage, and put it in savings. That money, plus their retirement accounts, was supposed to carry them through their golden years, except Linda had gotten cancer. And even with insurance, the treatments had cost them everything. Clinical trials, experimental medications, flights to specialists in Houston and Boston, home health aides, hospice care at the end. They'd spent $180,000 of their savings in 2 years trying to keep her alive. And then she'd died anyway, and Martin had been left with $60,000 and a broken heart, and no idea how to live in a world without her. He'd thought the savings would be enough. He'd get another job, something to tide him over until Social Security kicked in at full retirement age. He could make it work, except he couldn't get another job, and the savings had kept draining, and now here he was. His phone rang. He looked at the screen. Emily, his daughter. He let it go to voicemail. She called every week like clockwork. Sunday evenings, usually around 7. She'd ask how he was doing, what he'd been up to, whether he needed anything. And every week he told her the same lies. I'm fine, honey. Just keeping busy. No, I don't need anything. He couldn't tell her the truth. Couldn't tell her that he was about to be evicted, that he'd been unemployed for almost a year, that he was applying for dishwasher jobs and getting rejected because he was too old. Emily had her own problems. She was 38, divorced, raising 2 kids on her own while working as a nurse. She lived in Oregon, 2,000 miles away, in a small town where she could afford rent on a nurse's salary. Her ex-husband paid minimal child support. She was barely making it herself. Martin wouldn't burden her with his problems. Wouldn't ask her for help. She'd offer if she knew, would probably send him money she couldn't afford to send, would feel guilty that she couldn't do more. So he didn't tell her. He let the voicemail notification sit there on his phone, that little red circle with the number 1 inside it, and he ignored it. Instead, he opened his laptop, a 6-year-old Dell that took 3 minutes to boot up, and went back to job searching. Indeed. Monster. LinkedIn. Craigslist. The local newspaper's classifieds section, which was mostly digital now but still had a few listings. He'd applied to 187 jobs in the past 11 months. He kept a spreadsheet, noting the date he applied, the position, the company, the result. The result column was uniformly empty, except for the 23 entries that said no response and the 8 that said position filled. He'd gotten 4 interviews. All 4 had ended the same way. Thanks for coming in. We'll be in touch. We've decided to go with someone else. Tonight he applied to 12 more jobs. Warehouse associate at a distribution center. Requirements: ability to lift 50 pounds repeatedly, work on feet for extended periods, comfortable with technology. Pay: $15 hour. Janitor at an office building. Requirements: ability to perform basic cleaning tasks, lift up to 40 pounds, work overnight shifts. Pay: $13.50 hour. Landscaping laborer. Requirements: outdoor work in all weather, lifting, digging, planting. Pay: $14 hour. Parking lot attendant at a shopping mall. Requirements: standing for extended periods, basic math skills, customer service. Pay: $12 hour. Night stalker at a big box store. Requirements: lifting, moving merchandise, operating equipment. Pay: $13 hour. Security guard at a construction site. Requirements: valid driver's license, ability to walk site perimeter, basic report writing. Pay: $14 hour. And on. Each application took 20 to 30 minutes. Name, address, employment history, education, skills, upload resume, answer screening questions. Are you legally authorized to work in the United States? Yes. Are you willing to submit to a background check? Yes. Are you willing to submit to a drug test? Yes. And the question that wasn't asked but that he knew was being evaluated: are you too old? By the time he finished, it was past midnight. His eyes hurt from staring at the screen. His back hurt from sitting hunched over the laptop. He closed the computer, went to bed, and lay awake staring at the ceiling until the sun came up. 3 days later, Martin got a call from a number he didn't recognize. Hello? Hi, is this Martin Reeves? This is Martin. Hi, Martin, this is Corey from Jack's Family Diner. We spoke earlier this week about the dishwasher position. Martin sat up straighter on his couch, his heart suddenly beating faster. Yes, I remember. So look, I wanted to follow up with you because something's come up. Our current dishwasher just quit, like literally walked out in the middle of his shift yesterday, and we're in a bind. I know I said we had other candidates, but honestly, we need someone who can start right away. Are you still interested? Yes, Martin said, trying not to sound too desperate. Absolutely. I can start whenever you need me. Can you come in tomorrow morning, like 6 a.m.? We'd need you for the breakfast rush, and I can train you before it gets crazy. 6 a.m. works, Martin said. Okay, great. Pay is $13 an hour to start. Cash at the end of each week, no benefits for the first 90 days. Then we can talk about adding you to our insurance plan if you're still working out. Shifts are Tuesday through Saturday, 6 a.m. to 2 p.m. That work for you? 8-hour shifts, 5 days a week, 40 hours. $520 before taxes. That works, Martin said. Perfect. Just come in through the back entrance by the dumpsters and ask for me. Wear closed, toe shoes, long pants, and you'll want to bring a change of clothes because you're going to get wet and probably gross. Sound good? Sounds good. Thank you, Corey. No problem. See you tomorrow morning. Corey hung up and Martin sat there holding his phone, feeling something he hadn't felt in months. Hope. It wasn't much. $13 an hour washing dishes was about as far from his $87,000 a year construction supervisor job as he could imagine. But it was something. It was income. It was a chance. He called his landlord. Hello? She sounded wary. She probably saw his name on her caller ID and was steeling herself for another conversation about late rent. Hi, Mrs. Patterson. It's Martin Reeves from apartment 2B. Martin, how are you? I'm calling about the rent. I know I'm behind and I just wanted to let you know that I just got a job. I start tomorrow. I'll be able to pay you what I owe by the end of the month. There was a pause on the line. Martin, that's wonderful. I'm glad you found something. But I need to be honest with you. I've already started the eviction process. I have bills to pay too and I can't carry you anymore. I understand that, Martin said. But if I can pay you the back rent, can we stop the eviction? Another pause. Longer this time. How much can you pay me and when? Martin did the math. If he worked 40 hours a week for 3 weeks, he'd make about $1,500 after taxes. If he used his savings to cover the difference, he could pay her the $1,900 he owed by the end of October. I can pay you $1,900 by October 31st. All the back rent, plus this month's current rent. And then what about November's rent? I'll have that on time. Martin ... double quotes. She sighed. Look, I like you. You've been a good tenant, but I can't keep doing this. If you can pay me the $1,900 by the end of the month, I'll stop the eviction. But if you're late again in November, even by a day, I'm moving forward with it. I can't afford to be compassionate anymore. I understand, Martin said. Thank you, Mrs. Patterson. Good luck with your new job, Martin. She hung up and Martin felt the weight shift slightly. Not gone, but manageable. For now. He had 3.5 weeks to make $1,900, which meant he needed to work every shift without fail. Not get fired, not get injured, not get sick. He could do that. He had to do that. The back entrance of Jack's Family Diner was exactly what you'd expect. A metal door with a faded employees only sign. A dumpster that smelled like a crime scene, a stack of milk crates, and a broken pallet leaning against the brick wall. Martin arrived at 5:47 a.m., 13 minutes early. Because being on time meant being late in the construction world, and old habits died hard. He knocked on the door. After a moment it opened, and Corey stood there looking like he hadn't slept much. Martin, hey, come on in. The kitchen was bigger than it had looked from the dining room, but not by much. A long row of stainless steel counters, industrial stoves and griddles. A massive refrigerator. Shelves stacked with supplies, and in the back corner, the dish pit. 2 massive sinks. A commercial dishwasher that looked like it could double as a spaceship. And stacks of bus tubs filled with dirty dishes, glasses, and silverware. So here's the deal, Corey said, walking him toward the dish pit. Your job is pretty straightforward. Servers bring the dirty dishes to you in these bus tubs. You scrape the food into the trash, rinse everything off in this sink, load it into the racks, run it through the machine, and then put everything away in the right places. Plates go here, glasses go here, silverware gets sorted into these bins. He demonstrated the process, moving quickly, efficiently, his hands flying through the motions. The machine cycle takes about 2 minutes. During that time, you should be scraping and rinsing the next load. You want to keep a rhythm going, always something in the machine, always something being prepped. Being if you fall behind, the servers can't reset their tables and then the whole front of house backs up. Got it, Martin said, watching carefully. Also, you're going to be the backup prep cook. When we're slow, you'll help chop vegetables, portion out, ingredients, that kind of thing. Chef Miguel will show you what needs to be done. Corey glanced at his watch. We've got about 40 minutes before the morning rush starts. Let me show you where everything goes. And then you can get started on the stuff that's already dirty from yesterday. For the next 35 minutes, Martin learned the geography of Jack's Family Diner's kitchen, where the clean plates lived, how to stack the glasses so they didn't break, the specific way Miguel wanted his prep vegetables cut, where the trash bags were stored, how to change the sanitizer in the dishwasher, how to mop the floors at the end of the shift. And then the first order came in, and Martin learned what breakfast rush really meant. It was war. Servers appeared at the dish pit every 30 seconds, dropping off bus tubs loaded with plates smeared with egg yolk and syrup, coffee cups with lipstick stains, silverware sticky with butter, glasses with juice and milk residue. The pile grew faster than Martin could clear it. He scraped, rinsed, loaded, started the machine, scraped, rinsed, loaded, started the machine. His hands moved, his back ached, his feet hurt. Steam from the dishwasher soaked his shirt. Food waste splashed on his pants. The temperature in the kitchen climbed into the 90s. An hour in, he was already exhausted. 2 hours in, his lower back was screaming. 3 hours in, he caught himself moving slower, his hands fumbling with the dishes, his rhythm breaking down. "Hey, you okay back there?" Corey appeared, looking concerned. "I'm fine," Martin said, though he wasn't sure he was. "Take a 5-minute break. Seriously, go sit down, drink some water. The rush is slowing down." Martin didn't want to take a break. Didn't want to seem weak. But his body was making executive decisions without consulting his pride. He went to the small break room, really just a closet with a folding chair and a water cooler, and sat down. His hands were shaking. His shirt was soaked through. His back felt like someone had driven nails into it. This is what $13 an hour feels like, he thought. Angela appeared in the doorway with a bottle of water. "Here. You're going to want to hydrate constantly. This job will dehydrate you faster than you'd think." "Thank you," Martin said, taking the water and drinking half of it in one long pull. "First day's always the hardest," Angela said. "Your body will adjust." "How long have you worked here?" Martin asked. 17 years, Angela said. "Started as a server when my kids were little. Moved to the register when my knees started giving out. It's honest work, and it pays the bills." "You like it?" Angela smiled, but it was the smile of someone who'd made peace with disappointment a long time ago. "I survive it. That's about all anyone can ask for these days." She left him to finish his water, and after 5 minutes, Martin went back to the dish pit. The next 4 hours passed in a blur. More dishes, more food waste, more heat and steam and exhaustion. But he made it through his shift. At 2:07 p.m., Corey came to check on him. "Hey, so you did good for your first day. A little slow toward the end, but that'll get better as you get used to the pace. Can you come back tomorrow same time?" "I'll be here," Martin said. "Cool. Here's your pay for today." Corey handed him 5 $20 bills and a 5. 8 hours at $13 an hour is $104, but we do cash payment daily for the first week until we figure out if it's working out. After that, we'll do weekly checks. Martin looked at the $105 in his hand. He'd just worked 8 hours of the hardest physical labor he'd done in years, and he was holding $105. It was the most money he'd made in 11 months. "Thank you," he said. "No problem. See you tomorrow." Martin drove home, every muscle in his body screaming. He parked in his spot, walked up the stairs to his apartment, unlocked the door, and immediately went to the bathroom to shower. The hot water felt like heaven. He stood under the spray for 20 minutes watching the food waste and dishwater and sweat circle the drain. When he got out, he looked at himself in the mirror. His face was red from the heat. His hands were pruned and raw. His back was knotted with tension. But he'd done it. He'd survived day one. He had $105. He needed $1,900 by the end of the month. He went to bed at 7 p.m. and slept like the dead. For the next 2 weeks, Martin lived in a cycle of work, sleep, eat, repeat. Every morning he awoke at 4:45 a.m., showered, ate a quick breakfast of toast and coffee, drove to Jack's family diner, and started his shift at 6 a.m. 8 hours in the dish pit, scraping and rinsing and loading and sweating and aching. Then home where he'd shower again, eat something, and collapse into bed. He didn't watch TV, didn't read, didn't call his daughter back when she left voicemails wondering why he wasn't answering. He just worked. By the end of week 1, he had $525 in cash. By the end of week 2, he had $1,050. His body was adjusting, but barely. His back hurt constantly. His hands were developing calluses. His feet throbbed at night. He'd lost 12 pounds, most of it from sweating 8 hours a day in a kitchen that averaged 95 degrees. But he was making it. And then, on a Tuesday morning during his 3rd week, during the middle of the breakfast rush, everything fell apart. He was loading dishes into a rack when he felt it, a sharp stabbing pain in his lower back like someone had driven a knife into his spine. His legs buckled. He grabbed the edge of the sink to keep from falling. "Fuck," he said under his breath, trying to breathe through it. Miguel, the head cook, saw him. "Hey, you okay?" "I'm fine," Martin said, though he clearly wasn't. "Go sit down, man. You look like you're gonna pass out." "I'm fine," Martin repeated, straightening up slowly, carefully testing his back. The pain was still there, but it had dulled to a constant throb instead of the sharp stabbing. He went back to work. 20 minutes later, the pain came back, worse this time. His vision went white for a second. He had to set down the plate he was holding and grip the sink with both hands, breathing hard. Corey appeared. "Martin, seriously, you need to take a break." "I can't afford to take a break," Martin said, and he heard how desperate he sounded. "Dude, you're gonna hurt yourself. Go sit down." 5 minutes. "I can't," Martin started to say, but another wave of pain hit him and he actually cried out. Miguel and Corey both moved toward him, and Martin waved them off. I'm fine, I just need a second. But he wasn't fine. His body was done. His 67-year-old back had reached its limit, and it was staging a rebellion. He made it to the break room, sat down in the folding chair, and put his head in his hands. This was it. He was going to lose this job. They were going to fire him because he couldn't keep up, because he was too old, because his body was failing him. And if he lost this job, he'd lose his apartment. And if he lost his apartment, he'd be on the street. 67 years old and homeless. The thought was so absurd, so impossible that he almost laughed. Except he couldn't laugh because he might cry instead. Corey came into the break room. Hey man, I think you should go home. Take the rest of the day off, rest up, come back tomorrow. I need the hours, Martin said. I know. I'm telling you to take care of yourself. I can't afford to take care of myself, Martin said, and it came out more bitter than he'd intended. Corey sat down on one of the milk crates. Look, Martin, I'm going to be real with you. You're doing a good job. You show up on time, you work hard, you don't complain. But you're killing yourself doing this. This job is hard on your body, and I don't know how much longer you can physically do it. I can do it, Martin said. Can you, though? The question hung in the air. I have to, Martin finally said. I'm being evicted. I have 19 days to come up with $1,900 or I'm homeless. So yeah, I can do it, because I don't have a choice. Corey was quiet for a long moment. Then, I didn't know that. Why would you? Martin said. It's not your problem. How much have you made so far? About $1,050. I need another $850, which means I need to work every remaining shift without missing a day or getting fired. Corey ran his hand through his hair. Man, that's rough. It is what it is. Is there anyone you can ask for help? Family? My daughter has her own problems. I'm not burdening her with mine. Friends? Most of my friends were work friends. When you lose your job at 67, you find out pretty quickly who your real friends are. Turns out I didn't have many. Corey looked genuinely troubled. I want to help, but I don't know how. I can't pay you more, that's a corporate decision. I can't give you more hours because you're already at the maximum. I'm not asking you to help, Martin interrupted. I'm telling you why I need to go back to work right now instead of going home. He stood up, testing his back. The pain was still there, but it was manageable. He could work through it. Martin, I'm fine, Corey. Let me get back to work. He walked back to the dish pit before Corey could stop him, and he worked the rest of his shift through the pain. That night, lying in bed, he took 4 ibuprofen and prayed his back would feel better in the morning. It didn't. By day 17 of his 3rd week, Martin was running on pure willpower and spite. His back hurt so badly that getting out of bed took 10 minutes of careful maneuvering. He'd started sleeping with ice packs. He'd bought a back brace from a drugstore and wore it under his shirt during his shifts. He popped ibuprofen like candy, and he kept working. He had $1,680 in cash now hidden in a coffee can in his apartment. He needed $220 more to make the $1,900. 5 more shifts. He could do 5 more shifts. On day 19, during the lunch rush, one of the servers, a woman in her mid-20s named Brittany, came to the dish pit with a comment. Hey, old man, think you could move a little faster? My tables are waiting for clean plates. She said it with a smile like it was a joke, but Martin heard the edge underneath. The impatience, the judgment. I'm moving as fast as I can, Martin said evenly. Yeah, well, maybe that's not fast enough, Brittany said, no longer smiling. Some of us have to actually make tips, and we can't do that if you're holding everything up. Miguel heard her from the grill station. Yo, Brittany, back off. He's doing his best. His best is slowing down everyone else, Brittany shot back. Then help him, Miguel said. You got hands, don't you? That's not my job, Brittany said. Neither's being an asshole, but you're doing it anyway, Miguel said. Brittany glared at Miguel, then at Martin, then stormed off. Martin felt his face burning. The humiliation of it, being called old man, being told he wasn't good enough, being defended like he was someone who needed defending, settled into his chest like a stone. He worked faster, pushing through the pain, determined to prove that he could keep up. At the end of his shift, Corey pulled him aside. Hey, I heard what happened with Brittany earlier. I talked to her and she apologized. She doesn't need to apologize, Martin said. Yeah, she does. What she said was out of line. She was right, though. I'm slowing everyone down. You're not, I am, Martin interrupted. I'm 67 years old, working a job meant for someone half my age, and I'm barely keeping up. Everyone can see it. Might as well acknowledge it. Corey looked uncomfortable. Martin, look, I don't want you to feel like, how much do I owe for this week? Martin asked, changing the subject. You worked 5 shifts, so that's $520 before taxes. But we're doing direct deposit now, so you'll get it in your account Friday. Martin's heart sank. I need cash. I thought we were doing cash. We were for the first 2 weeks, but corporate requires all employees to be on direct deposit after a trial period. It's policy. I don't have time for direct deposit, Martin said, trying to keep the panic out of his voice. I need to pay my landlord by the end of the month. That's 2 days from now. I'm sorry, man. I can't override corporate policy. Martin felt something inside him crack. 2 days. He had 2 days to come up with $220, and his paycheck was going to be sitting in his bank account instead of in his hand. When exactly will the money hit my account? He asked. Friday morning, usually. And today's Wednesday, yeah. Friday was October 31st. His deadline. The money hit his account Friday morning. He could pay his landlord. Barely. By the skin of his teeth. Okay, Martin said. Okay. That works. Is you sure? Because you don't look it. Sure, I'm sure. Martin lied. He went home that night and stared at the coffee can full of cash. 1,680. So close. So impossibly close. He called Mrs. Patterson. Hello, Mrs. Patterson, it's Martin. I know the rent's due Friday, and I just wanted to confirm that I'll have it for you by Friday afternoon. Martin, I thought we agreed on the end of October. That's Thursday. Friday is still technically the end of October, Martin said, though he knew he was splitting hairs. Martin ... double quotes, she sighed. I've been more than patient with you. I need the money Thursday or I'm moving forward with the eviction. I have my own bills to pay. I understand that, but my paycheck doesn't clear until Friday morning. Can you give me one more day? I've given you multiple days, Martin. Multiple weeks. I'm sorry, but no. Thursday by 5 p.m. or the eviction proceeds. Please, Martin said, and he hated how his voice sounded. Begging, desperate. I'm working. I have the money. It's just a timing issue. I'm sorry, Martin. Thursday by 5 p.m. She hung up. Martin sat there holding his phone, feeling the world close in around him. Thursday by 5 p.m. His paycheck wouldn't clear until Friday morning. He was $220 short. He could try to borrow it from someone, except he didn't have anyone to borrow from. He could try to get an advance from Corey, except Corey had already said he couldn't override corporate policy. He could try to get a payday loan, except those required employment verification, and he'd probably end up paying more in fees than the loan was worth. He was out of options. Unless... Martin opened his banking app and looked at his savings account. $11,400. The last of Linda's money. The last cushion between him and total financial ruin. If he withdrew $220, he'd have $11,180, and he'd be able to stay in his apartment. And then when his paycheck cleared on Friday, he could deposit that money back into savings and he'd be okay. It was just shuffling money around. It would be fine. Except he knew it wouldn't be fine. Because once he started pulling from savings again, it would never stop. There would always be something. A car repair, a medical bill, another shortfall. And the $11,180 would become $10,000, would become $8,000, would become nothing. But what choice did he have? He went to the ATM Thursday morning and withdrew $220, added it to the $1,680 in the coffee can, counted it 3 times to make sure, $1,900. At 4:37 p.m. on Thursday, October 30th, Martin Reeves walked to his landlord's house and knocked on her door. Mrs. Patterson answered, and her expression was resigned. Hi, Martin. I have your money, he said, and handed her an envelope with $1,900 in cash. She counted it carefully, then looked up at him. Thank you. This covers September and October's rent. November's due in 2 days. I know. I'll have it. I hope so, Martin. I really do. He walked back to his apartment, sat down on his couch, and felt the weight of everything pressing down on him. He'd made it. Barely. By the absolute thinnest margin imaginable. But he'd made it, for now. November came, and with it, new problems. Martin's paycheck cleared on Friday as promised, $520 after taxes. He deposited $220 back into his savings, trying to rebuild what he'd borrowed, and kept $300 for groceries and gas, which meant he had $300 to live on for the next week. His rent was due Sunday, $950. He'd work 5 more shifts next week, make another $520, and he'd have $820 total. Still short by $130, which meant pulling from savings again. And again, the math didn't work. Even if he kept working 40 hours a week, even if he never missed a shift, even if nothing went wrong, he was bleeding savings at a rate of $130 a month. At that rate, his $11,180 in savings would last about 7 years. Except things always went wrong. Cars broke down, medical problems appeared. Expenses came up. He couldn't survive like this long term. But he couldn't think about long term right now. He could only think about today, tomorrow, next week. One shift at a time. $1 at a time. On Monday of his 4th week working at Jack's Family Diner, Martin was in the dish pit during the morning rush when he overheard a conversation from the kitchen. It was Corey and another manager, a woman named Vanessa, who handled the front of house. "I'm just saying, we need to think about our staffing," Vanessa was saying. "The back of house is falling behind and it's affecting table turnover. We're leaving money on the table. What do you want me to do?" Corey asked. "We're fully staffed, are we though? Because that dishwasher barely keeping up. We've had multiple servers complain about waiting for clean dishes. Maybe we need someone faster." "Martin's doing fine, is he? Or are you just being nice to him because you feel bad?" Martin stopped what he was doing, listening. "That's not fair," Corey said. "I'm not trying to be mean. I'm being practical. This is a business. We need people who can keep pace, and he's what, 70? 67? Exactly. How long do you think he can realistically do this job before his body gives out or he gets hurt? I don't know, but he's here and he's working and he needs this job. We all need our jobs, Corey, but that doesn't mean we're all capable of doing them." There was a pause. "Just think about it," Vanessa said. "That's all I'm asking." Martin went back to scraping dishes, his hands moving automatically, his mind reeling. They were talking about replacing him. Not because he'd done anything wrong. Not because he was lazy or unreliable. Because he was 67 years old and they didn't think he could keep up. And maybe they were right. But he couldn't afford to be right. He couldn't afford to lose this job. Not now. Not when he was finally starting to stabilize. So he worked faster. Ignored the pain in his back. Ignored the exhaustion. Ignored the way his hands shook at the end of each shift. He couldn't be perfect, but he could be good enough. He had to be. On the first Tuesday of November, during a slow period between breakfast and lunch, Corey called Martin into the break room. Martin's stomach dropped. This was it. They were firing him. "Have a seat," Corey said, and his tone was serious. Martin sat down, his heart pounding. "So, I wanted to talk to you about something," Corey began. "I've been getting feedback from the front of house about the dish pit, and I wanted to address it with you directly." "I know I'm slow," Martin said before Corey could continue. "I'm working on it. I'm getting faster. I'm not here to criticize you," Corey said. "Actually, I wanted to ask you something. Why are you doing this job?" Martin blinked. "What? Why are you washing dishes at Jack's Family Diner? You were a construction supervisor. You made good money. You had a career, so why this?" "Because I need money," Martin said simply. "But why not find another construction job? Or something in your field? I tried for 11 months. Nobody wants to hire a 67-year-old supervisor, but you have experience." "Experience doesn't matter when you're my age," Martin interrupted. "Companies see my resume and they see liability. Insurance costs. Someone who might retire in a few years. Someone whose body might break down. Someone who doesn't fit the culture. I've heard every excuse. The bottom line is nobody wants to hire me for what I used to do, so I'm doing what I can do." Corey was quiet for a moment. "And you're about to lose your apartment?" "Was about to lose it. I made my back rent. I'm making this month's rent. I'm surviving. Barely by the sound of it. Barely is still surviving." Corey leaned back in his chair. "Martin, I'm going to tell you something, and I need you to hear me. You're doing a good job. Not a perfect job, but a good job. You show up on time, you work hard, you don't cause problems, but this job is going to kill you. Not figuratively. Literally. Your body can't sustain this much longer, so you're firing me." "No," Corey said, "I'm not firing you. But I need you to understand what you're doing to yourself. You're destroying your body for $13 an hour. Is that worth it?" "It is if the alternative is homelessness," Martin said. Corey nodded slowly. "Okay, then here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to keep you on, but I'm also going to be watching, and if I think you're in actual danger of hurting yourself, I'm going to pull you. Not because I don't care, but because I do." "Deal?" "Deal," Martin said, relieved. "Good. Now get back to work." Martin stood up, but before he left the break room, he turned back to Corey. "Why are you helping me?" he asked. Corey looked uncomfortable. "Because my dad went through something similar. He was laid off at 63, couldn't find work for 2 years. Ended up working at a hardware store making minimum wage until he qualified for Social Security. He died 6 months after he retired. Heart attack. And I always wondered if those 2 years of struggling, of being humiliated, of doing work that was beneath what he was capable of, if that's what killed him. So when I see you, I see him. And I can't fire him again, you know? Martin didn't know what to say to that. Get back to work, Corey said again, softer this time. Martin went back to the dish pit, and for the first time in weeks he felt something other than desperation. He felt seen. 3 weeks later, on a Friday morning during the breakfast rush, something happened that would change everything. Martin was at his station, working through the endless stream of dirty dishes, when he heard a commotion from the dining room. Raised voices. Someone yelling. He glanced toward the kitchen entrance and saw Brittany, the server who'd called him old man, backing away from a table. Her face was red, and she looked on the verge of tears. A man at the table, middle-aged, overweight, wearing a business suit, was standing up, pointing at her, his voice loud enough to carry into the kitchen. "This is unacceptable. I've been waiting 20 minutes for my food. 20 minutes. Do you know who I am?" Miguel muttered something in Spanish that Martin didn't catch, but that sounded unflattering. Corey rushed out from the back office, moving toward the confrontation. "Sir, I'm the manager here. Let's talk about this calmly. I don't want to talk calmly. I want my goddamn breakfast. Your order is being prepared right now. It'll be out in just a few minutes." "A few minutes? I've already waited 20. This is ridiculous. I understand you're frustrated, and I apologize for the wait. Your meal will be comped, no charge. I don't want it comped. I want competent service." The man grabbed his coat and started to storm out, and as he passed Brittany, he muttered something that Martin couldn't quite hear, but that made Brittany flinch. Corey followed him to the door, trying to de-escalate, but the man shoved past him and left. The diner went quiet for a moment, that post-confrontation silence where everyone's still processing what just happened. Then slowly the normal sounds resumed. Conversations, clinking silverware, the sizzle of the griddle. Brittany came into the kitchen, her face still red, her hands shaking. "You okay?" Miguel asked. "I'm fine," Brittany said, but she clearly wasn't. Corey came back in, looking frustrated. "Brittany, you didn't do anything wrong. Some people are just oshels." "He called me an idiot," Brittany said quietly. "Said I was too stupid to be a waitress." "He's wrong," Corey said firmly. "Don't let him get in your head." But Brittany was already spiraling. Martin could see it in her face. The self-doubt, the humiliation, the feeling of being small. He'd felt that same feeling dozens of times in the past year. Being dismissed, being talked down to, being made to feel like he was less than. "Hey," Martin said, and everyone turned to look at him. "Can I say something?" Brittany looked at him, surprised. She probably expected him to still be mad about the old man comment. "That guy was an asshole," Martin said. "And assholes say asshole things because they're unhappy with their own lives. It has nothing to do with you." "He waited 20 minutes, Brittany said. "That's my fault." "No, it's not. I saw the order come in. It was complicated. Custom modifications. No salt on the eggs, extra crispy bacon, specific temperature on the coffee. The kitchen did their best. But still nothing," Martin interrupted. "You're a good server. You're fast, you're attentive, you remember regulars' orders. I've watched you. That guy was an entitled prick who was having a bad day and decided to take it out on you. Don't let him define your worth." Brittany looked at him for a long moment, and then she nodded. "Thanks. No problem." She went back to the dining room, and Miguel looked at Martin with something like respect. "That was good, man." "Just the truth," Martin said, and went back to his dishes. That afternoon, after Martin's shift ended, Corey pulled him aside again. "Can we talk?" "Sure," Martin said, bracing himself. They went to the break room, and Corey sat down across from him. "That thing you said to Brittany earlier, that was ... that was really good. You diffused a situation that could have gotten ugly." "She looked like she needed to hear it," Martin said. "She did. And that made me think about something." Corey paused. "How would you feel about doing more than just dishwashing?" Martin blinked. "What do you mean?" "We've been having issues with employee morale lately. Turnover's high, people are stressed, there's conflict between front of house and back of house. And I realize we don't have anyone who's like, I don't know, a mentor, someone with life experience who can talk to people when things get hard." "You want me to be a mentor?" Martin asked, not quite following. "Sort of, not officially. But like, what if part of your job was also just being available to talk to people? Help with conflicts, give advice, that kind of thing? I'd pay you an extra $1 an hour for it. Make it $14. That's..." "I don't know if I'm qualified to do that," Martin said. "You're more qualified than anyone else here. You've lived a whole life. You've dealt with loss, with hardship, with challenges. Most of the people working here are kids who've never experienced real adversity. They could learn from you." Martin thought about it. An extra $1 an hour was an extra $40 a week, $160 a month. That would almost close the gap in his budget. Okay, he said. Yeah, I'll do it. Great. Starting Monday, you're our official, I don't know, staff advisor? We'll figure out the title later. Corey stood up and extended his hand. Martin shook it. Thanks, Martin. Seriously. Thank you, Martin said. And for the first time in almost a year, he felt like maybe he was worth something again. The role of staff advisor started informally. Martin would work his regular dish pit shifts, but during slow periods, he'd wander out to the dining room or the kitchen, chatting with staff, checking in on people. He talked to Miguel about Miguel's dream of opening his own restaurant someday. He talked to Angela about her grandkids and her health problems. He talked to Brittany about her college classes and her student loans. He became the person people went to when things got hard. When servers were stressed about difficult customers, they'd vent to Martin and he'd listen. When cooks were frustrated about equipment that kept breaking down, they'd complain to Martin and he'd sympathize. When Corey was overwhelmed with corporate demands, he'd sit in the break room with Martin, and Martin would remind him that it was just a job, that he was doing his best, that nobody could ask for more than that. Slowly, the culture at Jack's family diner began to shift. People started treating each other better. Conflicts got resolved faster. Turnover slowed down. And Martin, for the first time since Linda had died, felt like he had a purpose beyond just surviving. But that didn't mean his problems had disappeared. He was still barely making ends meet, still pulling from savings every month to cover the gap between what he earned and what he needed. Still working a physically demanding job that was destroying his body. And then, in early December, everything fell apart again. He was driving home from his shift when his car made a sound it had never made before. A grinding, screeching noise from somewhere under the hood, followed by a plume of white smoke. Martin pulled over, turned off the engine, and sat there for a moment in silence. Then he opened the hood. The smoke was coming from the radiator. Coolant was leaking onto the ground. The engine was overheating. He called a tow truck, had the car taken to a mechanic, and got the diagnosis the next day. Cracked radiator, damaged water pump, blown head gasket. Total repair cost, $1,800. Martin sat in the mechanic's shop and felt the floor drop out from under him. He had $9,200 in his savings account. If he paid for the repairs, he'd have $7,400 left. But he needed the car. He couldn't get to work without it. Public transportation in his town was basically non-existent. Uber would cost $15 each way, $30 a day, $600 a month. He couldn't afford that. So he paid for the repairs and watched his savings drop to $7,400. That night, lying in bed, Martin did the math for the 100th time. At his current rate, his savings would be gone in about 10 months. Maybe less if another emergency came up, and then what? He didn't have an answer. He fell asleep with his phone in his hand, staring at his bank balance, feeling the weight of the world pressing down on him. The conversation that would change everything happened on a Thursday in mid-December, during a slow period between lunch and dinner. Martin was in the break room eating a sandwich he'd brought from home, peanut butter and jelly, because that was what he could afford, when Angela came in and sat down across from him. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Of course. Why are you here?" Martin looked up from his sandwich. "What do you mean?" "I mean, why are you working at a diner washing dishes? You're clearly overqualified for this. You're smart. You're capable. You have all this life experience. So why here?" Martin set down his sandwich. "Because I need money and nobody else will hire me, but there has to be something else you could do, something that pays better." "Like what?" Martin asked. "I'm 67 years old. I spent my entire career in construction, and that industry doesn't want me anymore. I don't have a college degree. I don't have tech skills. I don't have any marketable abilities other than being able to lift heavy things and work long hours. So when Corey offered me this job, I took it, because it was the only offer I'd gotten in almost a year." Angela was quiet for a moment. "Then, have you thought about what you're going to do when you can't do this job anymore?" "Every single day," Martin said honestly, and I don't have an answer." Angela nodded slowly. "My husband died 7 years ago. Heart attack. He was 58. We'd been saving for retirement, but when he died, I had to use almost all of it to pay for his funeral and settle his debts. I thought it'd be okay. I thought I'd find another job, maybe something that paid better. But nobody wanted to hire a 53-year-old woman with no college degree. So I ended up here. And I've been here ever since, watching my savings drain, knowing that when I'm too old to work, I'm going to end up in one of those terrible assisted living facilities where they warehouse people who can't afford anything better." "I'm sorry," Martin said. "Don't be. I'm not telling you this for sympathy. I'm telling you because I think you and I are in the same boat. We're both people who played by the rules, worked hard, tried to build a life, and then got screwed by a system that doesn't care about us once we're not economically valuable anymore. So what do we do about it?" Martin asked. "I don't know," Angela admitted. But I think we need to figure it out before it's too late. That conversation stayed with Martin for days, because Angela was right. They were in the same boat, and that boat was sinking. He started looking around the diner with new eyes, seeing not just his coworkers but their stories. Miguel, who'd come to America 20 years ago with nothing, who'd worked his way up from dishwasher to head cook, who still sent money home to his family in Mexico every month even though he was barely making enough to survive himself. Brittany, who was working 3 jobs while going to college full-time, accumulating tens of thousands in student debt, terrified that she'd graduate and still not be able to find work that paid enough to make it worth it. The other servers, the other cooks, all of them struggling in different ways. All of them trapped in a system that demanded everything and gave back as little as possible. And Martin realized something. His problem wasn't his problem. It was everyone's problem. The system was broken, and it was breaking everyone who tried to survive in it. But knowing that didn't fix anything. It just made him angry. The breaking point came on a Monday morning in early January. Martin was in the dish pit when he felt the familiar pain in his back. But this time it was different. Sharper, more intense. He tried to push through it, but after 15 minutes, he knew something was seriously wrong. He went to find Corey. "I need to go to urgent care," Martin said. "My back is... I can't keep working." Corey took one look at him and nodded. "Go, right now. Don't wait." Martin drove himself to the urgent care clinic, and after a 2-hour wait and a series of x-rays, the doctor gave him the news. "You have a herniated disc in your lumbar spine, likely from repetitive stress and overwork. You need to stop doing whatever activity caused this and start physical therapy immediately. If it doesn't improve, you might need surgery." "How long do I need to stop working?" Martin asked. "At least 2 weeks, possibly longer. I can't take 2 weeks off. If you don't, you're going to do permanent damage." "How much does physical therapy cost?" "With insurance, probably $30 to $50 per session. You'll need 2 sessions a week for at least 6 weeks. Martin didn't have insurance. He'd let it lapse after the 6 months from his severance ran out because he couldn't afford the premiums. And without insurance? $100 to $150 per session. Martin did the math. 12 sessions at $125 each was $1,500. He didn't have $1,500. Not anymore. "What if I don't do physical therapy?" he asked. "Then your condition will likely worsen. You could end up with chronic pain, mobility issues, potentially permanent disability. But I can still work?" The doctor looked at him with a mix of concern and frustration. "Technically, yes. But I strongly advise against it." "I'll think about it," Martin said. He drove back to Jack's family diner and told Corey he needed 2 weeks off. Corey looked worried. "Is this paid leave?" "No, I don't have paid leave, so you're not going to get paid for 2 weeks?" "No, Martin, can you afford that?" "Not really, but I don't have a choice." Corey was quiet for a moment. "Then I'm going to pay you anyway. Not full pay, but at least something. I'll figure out a way to make it work." "You don't have to do that." "I know I don't have to, but I'm going to." Those 2 weeks were the longest of Martin's life. He stayed in his apartment trying to rest his back, taking the painkillers the doctor had prescribed, doing the stretches and exercises from YouTube videos because he couldn't afford actual physical therapy. He didn't watch TV, he didn't read. He just lay on his couch staring at the ceiling, thinking about how close he was to the edge. His savings were down to $6,100. His rent was due in 2 weeks. He had maybe 6 months left before he ran out of money completely, and then, what, apply for disability? That took months, sometimes years, and didn't pay enough to live on anyway. Move in with Emily? She didn't have space. She could barely afford her own life. Become homeless? At 67, that was basically a death sentence. On day 10 of his leave, Martin got a call from an unknown number. "Hello? Hi, is this Martin Reeves?" "Yes. This is Jennifer from the Legal Aid Society. I'm calling about a potential class action lawsuit regarding age discrimination in hiring practices. Your name came up in our research as someone who might have been affected. Do you have a few minutes to talk?" Martin sat up on his couch, wincing at the pain in his back. "What kind of lawsuit?" "We're investigating systematic age discrimination in the service industry, restaurants, retail, hospitality. We've identified patterns of employers refusing to hire qualified applicants over the age of 50 simply because of their age. Based on public records and employment data, it looks like you might have been one of those applicants." "I applied to a lot of places," Martin said carefully. "Most didn't respond. That's exactly the pattern we're seeing. We're building a case that these companies are using algorithmic screening tools that filter out older applicants before humans even see their applications. It's illegal, but it's widespread. And you think you can prove it? We think we have enough evidence to make a compelling case, but we need plaintiffs. People willing to go on record about their experiences. What would that involve? depositions, possibly testimony, interviews with journalists. It's a time commitment, and it's not easy. But if we win, it could mean financial compensation for everyone affected. Martin thought about it. Financial compensation. That would solve a lot of problems. How much compensation are we talking about? That depends on a lot of factors. But we're looking at potentially 6 figures per plaintiff if we win or settle. 6 figures. That would mean security. That would mean not worrying about rent. That would mean being able to afford medical care. I'm interested, Martin said. Great. I'm going to send you some paperwork to review. Take your time with it. Talk to a lawyer if you want, and let me know if you'd like to move forward. Okay. And Martin, thank you for being willing to come forward. This kind of discrimination is invisible to most people, but it's destroying lives. Your voice matters. They hung up and Martin sat there holding his phone, feeling something he hadn't felt in months. Hope. Real hope. Maybe this wasn't the end. Maybe this was the beginning of something different. Martin went back to work after 2 weeks, his back still hurting but manageable with careful movement and regular painkillers. Corey had kept his promise and paid him $200 for the 2 weeks he'd been out. It wasn't much, but it was something. He settled back into his routine. Dish pit, staff advisor conversations, home, sleep, repeat. But now there was something else. The lawsuit. He'd signed the paperwork agreeing to be a named plaintiff. He'd done his deposition, telling his story to lawyers who recorded every word. He'd talked to a journalist from a national newspaper who was writing an investigative piece about age discrimination. And slowly the story started to gain traction. The article came out in March. The Invisible Unemployed. How America Discards Its Older Workers. It featured Martin's story along with stories from dozens of other people in similar situations. People who'd worked their entire lives, done everything right, and then been cast aside by a system that saw them as liabilities rather than assets. The article went viral. News outlets picked it up. Social media exploded. Politicians started talking about it. And suddenly, Martin Reeves' 67-year-old dishwasher at Jack's family diner was at the center of a national conversation. Reporters started calling him, asking for interviews, wanting to come to the diner and film him working. Corey fielded the requests, protecting Martin from the worst of it, but letting enough through that people could see what his life actually looked like. A local TV station did a piece, then a national morning show, then a documentary crew. And as the attention grew, something else started happening. People started showing up at Jack's family diner. Not to eat, though they did that too, but to meet Martin, to shake his hand, to tell him their own stories. I'm 54 and I've been unemployed for 2 years, a woman told him one morning. I thought I was alone. Thank you for showing me I'm not. My dad went through this before he died, a young man said. He never talked about it, but I knew. Watching your story helped me understand what he went through. You're an inspiration, an older man said. Don't stop fighting. And Martin realized something. His suffering hadn't been meaningless. By sharing his story, by being willing to be vulnerable and honest about how hard it had been, he'd given other people permission to acknowledge their own struggles. He'd made the invisible visible. The lawsuit moved forward. Discovery, depositions, expert witnesses, data analysis showing systematic discrimination across dozens of major restaurant chains and retail corporations. The companies fought back, of course, claimed there was no discrimination, claimed their hiring practices were fair and based on merit, claimed that the plaintiffs just weren't qualified. But the evidence was overwhelming. Internal emails discussing keeping the staff young, HR policies that filtered out applicants based on years of experience as a proxy for age, training documents that used coded language like culture fit and energy level to exclude older workers. In September, 18 months after Martin had first signed the paperwork, the companies agreed to settle. $340 million divided among 12,000 plaintiffs. Martin's share, $28,333. It wasn't life-changing money. It wasn't retire and never work again money. But it was breathing room money. It was security money. It was your going to be okay money. When the check arrived, Martin sat in his apartment holding it, staring at the numbers, feeling something break open in his chest. He'd made it. Not just survived, made it. He deposited the check, paid off his remaining debt, put $20,000 in savings, and gave himself permission to breathe for the first time in 2 years. But Martin didn't quit his job at Jack's family diner, because somewhere along the way it had stopped being just a job. It had become his community, his purpose, his family. He continued working as a dishwasher and staff advisor, but now with the security of knowing that if something went wrong, if his back gave out or his car broke down or an emergency happened, he'd be okay. And he started doing something else. He started speaking at senior centers, at workforce development programs, at community organizations, telling his story, talking about age discrimination, advocating for policy changes. He became a voice for the invisible, and other voices joined him. Angela started speaking too, sharing her story about being widowed and struggling to survive on diner wages. Miguel started organizing with other immigrant workers, fighting for better pay and working conditions. Brittany started a student debt advocacy group, connecting with other young people crushed by the cost of education. And slowly things started to change. Not everywhere, not all at once, but enough. Local businesses started implementing fair hiring practices. State legislators introduced anti-discrimination bills. National organizations began tracking and publicizing age discrimination data. The conversation had shifted. 5 years after that first day when Martin had walked into Jack's family diner with his plastic folder and his desperate hope, he stood in front of a crowd of 500 people at a workforce development conference. He was 72 now. His hair was completely white. His back still hurt sometimes. But he was still standing, still fighting, still here. "I want to tell you about a promise," he began. "Not a promise I made. A promise that was made to me. The American promise. Work hard, play by the rules, and you'll be okay. You'll have security, dignity, a chance at a good life." He paused, looking out at the audience. "I worked for 39 years. I built buildings. I raised a family. I paid my taxes. I did everything right. And then I got old. And suddenly the promise was broken. I applied to 187 jobs. I went on dozens of interviews. I was told I was too old, too experienced, too expensive, didn't fit the culture. I was rejected by a system that had decided I had no value anymore, so I took a job washing dishes for $13 an hour, because that was the only option available to me. And you know what I learned? I learned that the problem isn't me. It's not you. It's the system that sees workers as disposable, that values profit over people, that throws away anyone who doesn't fit the narrow definition of productive. But I also learned something else. I learned that we have power, not individual alone. We're vulnerable, but together we can change things. The lawsuit I was part of didn't just win money, it won acknowledgement. It forced companies to confront their discrimination. It started conversations that needed to be started. And that's what I'm asking you to do. Start conversations. Share your stories. Demand better. Not just for yourselves, but for everyone who comes after you, because the promise shouldn't be broken. Work hard, play by the rules, and you should be okay. That should be true. For everyone. At every age. So let's make it true. The audience erupted in applause. Martin stepped down from the podium, and as he walked through the crowd, people stopped him to shake his hand, to thank him, to tell him their stories. And he listened to every single one, because that's what he did now. He listened, he advocated, he fought. Not because he was special, but because someone had to. And he'd learned that sometimes the people who end up fighting are the people who have no choice but to fight, because the alternative is giving up. And Martin Reeves hadn't come this far to give up now. On a quiet Tuesday morning in spring, Martin was in the dish pit at Jack's family diner when Corey came to find him. "Hey, can we talk?" They went to the break room and Corey sat down across from him with a serious expression. "So I have some news. Corporate is implementing new hiring policies across all their locations. Based on the lawsuit and the bad publicity, they're completely overhauling how they recruit and evaluate candidates. They're removing age filters from their systems. They're training managers on unconscious bias. They're tracking demographic data to make sure they're not systematically excluding older workers." "That's good," Martin said. "It is, and they want to use you as a case study. They want to feature your story in their training materials. Show other managers what's possible when you give someone a chance." "Are they paying me for that?" Martin asked. Corey laughed. "Yes, they're offering you a consulting fee. $5,000. Martin blinked. $5,000 to let them use my story? To let them use your story and to do some speaking engagements at their corporate trainings. They want you to tell other managers what you told me that day in the break room, about how it feels to be rejected because of your age, about what it's like to work this job at 67, about how people like you are assets, not liabilities." "Will I still work here?" Martin asked. "If you want to. But honestly, with the settlement money and this consulting work, you don't have to. You could retire if you wanted." Martin thought about it. Retire. At 72, that was what most people his age were doing. Spending time with grandkids, traveling, relaxing. But Martin didn't want to retire, because this place, this diner, these people, they'd saved his life. And he wasn't ready to leave them. "I want to keep working here," Martin said. "Maybe fewer shifts. Maybe part-time. But I don't want to leave." Corey smiled. "I was hoping you'd say that." And so Martin continued. working at Jack's family diner 3 days a week, speaking at corporate trainings and conferences, advocating for policy changes, mentoring other older workers who were struggling to find employment. His daughter Emily came to visit that summer, the first time she'd seen him in 3 years. They sat in his apartment, the same apartment he'd almost lost, and she looked around at the modest but stable life he'd built. "I'm so proud of you, Dad," she said. "I'm proud of me too," Martin said, and he meant it. "You know, when Mom died, I was worried about you. I thought you'd give up." "I almost did," Martin admitted. "There were days when I didn't think I could keep going." "What stopped you?" Martin thought about it. "I don't know if it was one thing. Maybe it was stubbornness. Maybe it was not wanting to burden you. Maybe it was meeting people like Corey and Angela and Miguel who reminded me that I wasn't alone. Or maybe," Emily said, "it was because you're one of the strongest people I know." Martin smiled. "Your mother was the strong one. She was. But so are you." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, and then Emily asked, "What do you think Mom would say about all this? About the lawsuit and the speaking and everything you've done?" Martin thought about Linda, about her laugh, her kindness, her fierce belief that people should be treated with dignity. "I think she'd say I was making her proud," Martin said quietly. "And I think she'd tell me to keep fighting." "Then keep fighting, Dad." "I will." The final piece of Martin's story happened on a cold morning in November, almost exactly 6 years after he'd first walked into Jack's family diner. He was at his dish pit station when a young man came into the kitchen looking nervous. He was probably in his late 20s, dressed in khaki pants and a button-down shirt, carrying a folder. "Excuse me," the young man said. "Is Corey here?" "He's in the back office," Martin said. "You looking for a job?" The young man nodded. "Yeah. I saw the help wanted sign." Martin set down the dish he was rinsing and wiped his hands on his apron. "What position?" "Dishwasher. I know it's not much, but I need something. Anything, really." "What's your background?" Martin asked. Quote. The young man looked uncomfortable. "I was in tech, software engineer. Got laid off 8 months ago. I've been applying everywhere, but nobody's hiring. Or they're hiring, but not me. I think it's because I had a gap in my resume from when I took care of my sick mom. Companies see that and assume I'm unreliable or something." Martin nodded slowly. "And now you're applying to wash dishes." "Yeah. I'm not too proud. I just need to pay rent, you know." "I know," Martin said. "Wait here." He went to find Corey, and 5 minutes later, the young man was being interviewed. Martin went back to his station and continued working, but he was smiling. Because he'd just seen himself 6 years ago. Desperate, scared, willing to take any work just to survive. And this time the story would be different because Corey would hire him. And the young man would work hard. And maybe he'd find his way back to his field, or maybe he'd find something new, but either way, he'd be okay because that's what happened now. The system was still broken in a lot of ways. But it was less broken than it used to be. And that was progress. Small, incremental, hard-won progress. But progress nonetheless. That evening, after his shift ended, Martin drove home and parked in his usual spot. He looked up at his apartment building, the same building where he'd almost been evicted 6 years ago, and felt something he hadn't expected to. Feel. Gratitude. Not for the suffering. He wouldn't wish that on anyone. But for what it had taught him. About resilience. About community. About the way ordinary people doing small acts of kindness could change everything. Corey taking a chance on him. Angela sharing her story. Miguel teaching him Spanish curse words. Brittany eventually apologizing for calling him old man. The lawyers fighting for justice. The journalists amplifying invisible voices. All of it mattered. All of it added up. He walked up to his apartment, unlocked the door, and sat down on his couch. On his coffee table was a framed photo of Linda, smiling at the camera, happy and alive and forever young in his memory. "We did it," Martin said to the photo. "It took longer than I thought. It was harder than I imagined. But we did it." He sat there for a long time, talking to his dead wife, telling her about his day, about the young man who'd come looking for work, about how things were getting better. And then he made himself dinner, nothing fancy, just pasta and vegetables, and ate it while watching the news. There was a story about unemployment rates among older workers, about age discrimination lawsuits, about companies changing their hiring practices. Martin's story was mentioned briefly. A footnote. One example among many. And that was perfect. Because this was never about him being special or extraordinary. It was about him being ordinary. Being one of thousands, millions of people who'd been discarded by a system that should have valued them. And by being ordinary, by sharing his ordinary struggles, he'd helped other ordinary people realize they weren't alone. That was the real victory. Not the settlement money, not the media attention, not the speaking engagements. The real victory was the conversation, the awareness, The slow, grinding change that happened when enough people said this isn't okay loud enough that the world had to listen. Martin finished his dinner, washed his dish, and got ready for bed. Tomorrow he'd wake up at 5:45 a.m. He'd drive to Jack's family diner. He'd wash dishes and talk to his coworkers and maybe help train a new hire and remind everyone that they mattered, that their work had dignity, that they deserved to be treated with respect. And that would be enough, because he'd learned something fundamental in the past 6 years. He'd learned that survival wasn't just about making it through each day. It was about making those days mean something. It was about connection and purpose and fighting for a world that was slightly better than the one you'd inherited. He'd learned that age wasn't a liability. It was a resource. It was knowledge earned through decades of living. It was perspective that only came from surviving hardship. It was wisdom that the young needed and the old possessed. And he'd learned that the American promise, work hard, play by the rules, and you'll be okay, wasn't automatically true. But it could be made true, one person at a time, one story at a time, one conversation at a time. That was the promise Martin kept now. Not to himself, to everyone who came after him. The promise that their struggles wouldn't be invisible, that their voices would be heard, that the system that had failed them could be challenged, could be changed, could be made better. It wasn't a perfect promise, it wasn't a guaranteed promise, but it was a promise worth keeping. And Martin Reeves, 72-year-old dishwasher and accidental activist, was going to keep fighting to make it real. Because true dignity doesn't come from having a prestigious job or making a lot of money. True dignity comes from knowing that your life matters, that your work has value, that your struggles aren't meaningless, and that when the world tries to make you invisible, you have the power to say, I'm here, I matter, and I'm not going anywhere. That was Martin's story, but it was also Angela's story, and Miguel's story, and Brittany's story, and the young man who'd come in today looking for work. It was the story of everyone who'd ever been told they weren't good enough, weren't young enough, weren't cheap enough, didn't fit the culture. It was the story of ordinary people doing extraordinary things simply by refusing to give up. And it was a story that was still being written, one dish at a time, one shift at a time, one conversation at a time, one ordinary life making a difference in ways both large and small. That was the real promise. Not that life would be easy, but that it would be worth it. And Martin Reeves, against all odds, had kept that promise alive,